The people who stand closest to you often carry the deepest potential for betrayal, not because they are evil and not because they planned it, but because proximity to your light exposes the shadows they've spent their entire lives trying to hide. You've seen it before. Someone who once celebrated your every step suddenly grows quiet the moment you take a step ahead of them. A friend who once cheered for your growth begins to disappear when that growth becomes real. A colleague who praised your work in public somehow becomes the first to whisper doubts in private. And the unsettling truth is that their shift rarely begins with conscious malice. It begins with a silent internal fracture. Carl Jung believed that every human being carries a hidden second self, a shadow containing everything we deny, suppress, or refuse to acknowledge. Insecurity, inferiority, jealousy, fear. When you rise, when you evolve, when you begin to step into a version of yourself they never expected, you unconsciously shine a spotlight on that shadow, not just yours, theirs. And when a person is forced to confront the parts of themselves they despise, they often look for somewhere, someone to place the blame. They choose you. Your confidence highlights their self-doubt. Your discipline exposes their lack of control. Your success magnifies the dreams they abandoned. And so, admiration mutates, respect decays, affection becomes tension. The mind, threatened by its own unresolved weaknesses, turns the person they once valued into the person they now resent. Betrayal becomes a psychological escape route, a way for them to silence the mirror you unknowingly held up to their soul. This is why the deepest cuts don't come from strangers. Strangers can't feel threatened by a life they were never close enough to compare themselves to. It's the people who know your story, who shared your space, who walked beside you, who feel the sting of your transformation most intensely. Not because you harmed them, but because your evolution forced them to face the truth of their own stagnation. In this video, we will break down the hidden psychological mechanisms that turn admiration into envy, projection into resentment, and closeness into betrayal. Not through dramatization, but through a profound understanding of human nature itself, revealing why the ones who once praised you can become the ones who turn away. Carl Jung believed that the human psyche is not a single unified identity. It is a battlefield where light and darkness, pride and insecurity, admiration and envy all collide beneath the surface. At the center of this conflict is what Jung called the shadow, the hidden part of the personality that contains everything a person refuses to acknowledge about themselves. And it is here, in the shadow, that the true meaning of admiration is revealed. Because admiration is never as innocent as it appears. When someone looks at you and praises your strength, your discipline, your creativity, or your confidence, they are not responding to you. They are responding to the dormant part of themselves that recognizes what they could have been. People admire you for the qualities they wish they possessed, but when they feel incapable of reaching those qualities, the admiration becomes unstable. Jung wrote that the shadow reacts violently when a person encounters someone who embodies traits they have denied in themselves. Courage reminds them of their fear. Discipline reminds them of their inconsistency. Talent reminds them of their wasted potential. And confidence reminds them of every moment they stayed silent when they should have spoken. What begins as inspiration slowly transforms into a quiet psychological irritation.
This is why the people who praise you can also be the ones who undermine you. The conscious mind says, "I admire this person," while the unconscious mind whispers, "I resent them for showing me what I am not." Jung noticed this conflict in many of his patients. especially those who fixated on individuals they admired. Their admiration was never one-dimensional. It carried a hidden charge of comparison, inferiority, and self-judgment. The shadow is activated most intensely through proximity. The closer someone is to you, the more they compare themselves to you, and the more violently their shadow reacts. A stranger can admire your success without feeling threatened, but someone who knows your history, someone who shared similar beginnings, someone who once saw themselves as your equal, their admiration carries pressure. It forces them to confront the uncomfortable truth that you took a path they hesitated to take. This internal clash explains why betrayal is rarely calculated. It is not logic that turns admiration into envy. It is psychological warfare. A person can love you on the surface while their shadow quietly hunts for reasons to oppose you. They might criticize you behind your back, minimize your achievements, or withdraw their support without explanation. They are not attacking you. They are protecting themselves from the mirror you represent. Understanding this dynamic reveals a profound truth. Betrayal is not about you. It is about the parts of themselves they cannot face. Betrayal rarely begins with hatred. It begins with admiration that has been twisted by the weight of the admirer's internal conflict. When someone looks at you and sees qualities they wish they possessed, the mind does not remain neutral. It begins a psychological struggle between desire, envy, insecurity, and self-preservation. And when that struggle becomes unbearable, betrayal becomes the unconscious escape route. To understand why, we must look at the 4 psychological mechanisms that silently convert admiration into hostility. The first is projection. When a person cannot face their own insecurities, they project them onto someone else. Your confidence becomes arrogance in their eyes. Your discipline becomes obsession. Your ambition becomes selfishness. They are not truly reacting to you. They are reacting to the parts of themselves they refuse to confront. Projection allows them to preserve their self-image by assigning their shadow to you. The second mechanism is envy, a feeling far more complex than simple jealousy. Jealousy says, "I want what you have." Envy says, "I want what you have and I resent you for having it." It is a corrosive emotion because it contains both admiration and hostility. A friend may admire your progress, but quietly feel wounded by the comparison. Their support becomes inconsistent. Their tone becomes strained, and they begin to hope, for reasons they cannot even articulate, that you will stumble. Envy does not want equality. It wants disappearance of the comparison.
Next comes cognitive dissonance. When your presence exposes a gap between who they are and who they wish they were, the mind experiences tension. Your success reveals their excuses. Your growth reveals their stagnation. Your dedication exposes their procrastination. To resolve this discomfort, they do not try to improve themselves. Instead, they diminish you. They rewrite the story. You were lucky. You had advantages. You changed. You think you're better. Each narrative is not about truth. It is about psychological relief. Finally, there is the inferiority complex, a concept explored by Alfred Adler and deeply intertwined with Jung's shadow. When someone feels inferior, even unconsciously, they do not resent the world at large. They resent the individuals who most clearly reflect what they lack. A partner may admire your drive, but resent your independence because it highlights their dependence. A colleague may praise your skills, but quietly hope you fail because it reminds them of their limitations. The admiration remains, but it becomes painful, too painful to sustain honestly. History is full of examples. Students who betrayed their mentors, followers who turned against leaders they once worshipped, allies who transformed into rivals, not because the mentor or leader changed, but because the admirer could no longer tolerate the mirror standing in front of them.
Betrayal, at its core, is not an attack on the admired. It is an attack on the unbearable feeling of inadequacy that the admired evokes. By the end of this psychological chain, the admirer's internal conflict becomes external action. Betrayal becomes the mind's attempt to silence the discomfort you trigger within them. They are not trying to destroy you. They are trying to destroy the reflection of who they are afraid they might be. There is a quiet truth about human relationships that most people never acknowledge. Sometimes your light does not inspire others, it disturbs them. Your discipline, your confidence, your creativity, your moral strength, your intelligence, your ambition, your authenticity, all of it can become unsettling to someone who has buried those same qualities within themselves. Carl Jung understood this tension deeply. He believed that when your light exposes someone else's darkness, the reaction is rarely gratitude. More often, it is hostility. People live their lives constructing narratives that protect them from their own inadequacies. They tell themselves stories to make peace with the talents they never developed, the dreams they abandoned, the courage they never cultivated. As long as they surround themselves with people who reflect the same limitations, these stories remain intact. But the moment someone enters their life who embodies the very qualities they suppressed, the psychological equilibrium collapses. Your presence becomes a mirror they never asked to look into. This is where betrayal begins, not as a deliberate act, but as a reflexive attempt to destroy the discomfort you trigger within them. They are not trying to destroy you. They are trying to destroy the reflection of who they are afraid they might be.
There is a quiet truth about human relationships that most people never acknowledge. Sometimes your light does not inspire others, it disturbs them. Your discipline, your confidence, your creativity, your moral strength, your intelligence, your ambition, your authenticity, all of it can become unsettling to someone who has buried those same qualities within themselves. Carl Jung understood this tension deeply. He believed that when your light exposes someone else's darkness, the reaction is rarely gratitude. More often, it is hostility. People live their lives constructing narratives that protect them from their own inadequacies. They tell themselves stories to make peace with the talents they never developed, the dreams they abandoned, the courage they never cultivated. As long as they surround themselves with people who reflect the same limitations, these stories remain intact. But the moment someone enters their life who embodies the very qualities they suppressed, the psychological equilibrium collapses. Your presence becomes a mirror they never asked to look into. This is where betrayal begins, not as a deliberate act, but as a reflexive attempt to destroy the discomfort you create. Instead of growing, they defend. Instead of learning from you, they reinterpret you. Instead of elevating themselves, they try to pull you back down to where their insecurities feel safe. History is filled with examples of betrayal that emerged not from moral wrongdoing, but from psychological threat. Socrates was condemned by the very citizens who once admired him because his relentless pursuit of truth exposed their intellectual laziness. Julius Caesar was assassinated by men who envied his influence and feared the shadow he cast over their ambitions. Nikola Tesla was undermined by contemporaries whose egos could not tolerate the brilliance he displayed so effortlessly. These betrayals were not rooted in moral failure. They were born from emotional fragility. But you do not need to look to history to see this pattern. It happens in workplaces, where a colleague begins to resent you simply because you excel without much struggle. It happens in friendships, where someone who once admired your growth suddenly grows distant or competitive. It happens in relationships, where your independence is interpreted as a threat rather than a strength. It even happens online, In digital communities where talent or intelligence becomes a magnet for both admiration and irrational hostility. The truth is simple. People do not betray you because of your flaws. They betray you because of your strengths. Your achievements remind them of what they failed to achieve. Your courage reminds them of the fears they never confronted. Your clarity exposes their confusion. Your honesty unmasks their denial. Sometimes betrayal has nothing to do with who you are and everything to do with who they could have been. You become the embodiment of their unlived life, the version of themselves they abandoned long ago. And instead of facing that painful realization, they try to eliminate the reminder. The betrayal is not truly aimed at you, it is aimed at the shadow you awaken within them. There is a strange paradox about human nature that most people never see until they've lived through it. Sometimes the people who oppose you, resent you, or betray you understand you more deeply than the people who claim to love you. It is one of the most unsettling truths Jung hinted at. The shadow is always drawn to whatever threatens it. And because of that, enemies often study you more intensely than friends ever will. The person who envies you notices every detail: how you speak, how you move, how you think, how you rise after falling. They analyze your strengths, not out of admiration, but out of insecurity. They watch your progress, not to learn from it, but to measure themselves against it. They mimic your habits, your style, your choices, while insisting they are nothing like you. Betrayal, in this sense, is rarely casual. It is a psychological fixation. This is why the friend who grows jealous often becomes the one who watches you most closely. The colleague who secretly competes with you becomes the one who knows your schedule, your weaknesses, your vulnerabilities. The partner who resents your ambition becomes the one who memorizes your routines and patterns. The enemy, ironically, ends up knowing the architecture of your life better than the people who genuinely support you. Jung believed that the shadow is magnetically attracted to whatever exposes its inadequacy. And this attraction does not look like admiration, it looks like obsession. The person who betrays you cannot stop thinking about you. They cannot stop comparing themselves to you. They cannot stop replaying the moments where they felt smaller in your presence. Their hatred becomes a form of psychological attachment, a twisted devotion rooted in insecurity. History echoes this dynamic again and again. Brutus admired Caesar before he helped orchestrate his death. Many of history's revolutionaries were once protégés of the leaders they eventually overthrew. Even in the world of art and philosophy, students often rebelled against the very thinkers who shaped their worldview. Betrayal does not arise from indifference, it arises from emotional investment gone sour. The deeper the admiration once was, the sharper the betrayal becomes. The same pattern plays out in modern life. A coworker who resents you may follow your achievements more closely than your closest friends. A jealous friend may remember things about you that even you've forgotten. Someone who secretly competes with you may know your strengths with uncomfortable precision. These people are not simply observers, they are silent archivists of your life, collecting information, replaying memories, constructing narratives. Their fixation is the clearest sign that beneath the resentment, something deeper exists.
The truth is haunting but liberating. Betrayal is not the opposite of admiration. It is admiration corrupted by insecurity, twisted by comparison, and poisoned by the fear of inadequacy. People betray those they once admired because the emotional investment was always there. The shadow clings to what it hates, studies what it fears, and obsesses over what it cannot become. And when it can no longer cope with the psychological tension, the admiration collapses into hostility. Enemies often know you better than friends because they look at you with the intensity of someone fighting their own reflection. They betray you not because you mean nothing to them, but because, at some point, you meant too much. There is a moment in every human relationship where admiration subtly shifts into something far more dangerous. Carl Jung warned that admiration is not always innocent. Sometimes it is the first step toward emotional possession. People begin by admiring your confidence, your depth, your strength. But somewhere along the way, they start believing they deserve a piece of it. And when you no longer give them the validation they quietly depended on, the admiration mutates. It begins with emotional dependence. Someone becomes attached to the version of you that makes them feel safe, inspired, or significant. They build silent expectations around your presence, your attention, your consistency. They start to believe they understand you completely, and with this belief comes an unconscious sense of ownership. You become a symbol in their inner world, a source of meaning, comfort, or escape. But the moment you evolve or grow in a direction they did not anticipate, the illusion breaks. You step out of the role they created for you, and the shadow reacts with panic. What once felt like admiration transforms into disappointment. Disappointment curdles into resentment, and resentment, when matured in silence, becomes betrayal. It happens in relationships all the time. A partner admires your independence, yet tries to control you once they fear losing you. A friend worships your confidence, but becomes jealous the moment you outgrow the version of yourself they were comfortable with. A colleague praises your skill, but secretly resents you when you receive an opportunity they wanted. In each case, the betrayal is triggered not by what you did wrong, but by what you refused to be. Carl Jung believed this psychological shift occurs because most people fall in love not with who you are, but with what you represent to them. They admire the reflection of their own unlived potential. And when that reflection moves beyond their grasp, the ego feels abandoned. What they interpret as betrayal from you is often nothing more than you becoming yourself. This is the hidden progression. Admiration becomes emotional dependence. Dependence becomes expectation. Expectation becomes disappointment. Disappointment becomes resentment. And resentment becomes betrayal. The chain is not broken by logic, only by self-awareness, and most people do not have it. The truth is painfully simple. People don't betray you because you changed. They betray you because you stopped being the version of you that kept their insecurities quiet. They betray you because you needed you to stay small, predictable, and contained. And when you refused, their admiration collapsed under the weight of their own fragile ego. In the end, betrayal reveals far more about the betrayer than the betrayed. It is rarely an assessment of your value, your character, or your actions. More often, it is the echo of someone wrestling with their own unacknowledged shadow. The person who betrays you is frequently the person who cannot stand the mirror you hold up to their inadequacy. Your strength exposes their insecurity. Your confidence magnifies their doubt. Your authenticity threatens the facade they have spent years constructing. And so, admiration quietly mutates into resentment, and resentment into betrayal. Carl Jung warned that what we reject in ourselves, we eventually project onto others. The betrayer does not see you clearly. They see the parts of themselves they have buried and fear confronting. Their hostility is not born from your presence, but from the internal chaos your presence awakens. And once you recognize this, a strange but liberating transformation begins. You stop personalizing what was never personal. You detach from the emotional weight of the act. You see the event not as an attack on your identity, but as a revelation of someone else's inner war. This realization doesn't erase the pain, but it reframes it. You begin to understand that betrayal is often the byproduct of emotional immaturity, the sign of someone who has not yet developed the courage to face their own shadow. And if you look closely, you'll notice something else. People rarely betray those they feel superior to. Betrayal usually flows upward, toward the person they secretly admire, envy, or feel threatened by. It is the desperate act of someone trying to reclaim a sense of power they lost simply by being in your presence. When you see betrayal through this lens, You reclaim your peace. You no longer waste years asking, "Why would they do this to me?" Instead, you begin to ask the question that truly matters. What did my presence awaken in them? And that question leads to a final truth. Once you understand the shadow, you stop taking betrayal personally. You see that admiration and hostility are sometimes born from the same source, unresolved longing. You recognize that betrayal is not an indictment of your character, but a confession of someone else's unhealed wounds. And in that understanding, you rise above it. You detach, you regain your power, and you walk forward, not untouched, but untouchable.